Welcome to the AFR Saints channel, where we provide you daily content on your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to leave your comments below and smash that like button. Who dat?
First, I just want to thank everyone for coming for this awesome opportunity. This is the start of an incredible place. This place truly is a special place for my family, for the opportunities we've had the last couple of weeks to win a Super Bowl in the Caesars Superdome and to now become the head football coach of the New Orleans Saints. This is such an incredible place, and we can't wait to make it home, and we truly feel honored.
Saints coach Kellen Moore introduced on Thursday. Ross Jackson from LouisianaSports.net and Locked On Saints was there. He's here now. How are you, man?
Hey, dude, doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Always our pleasure. Reaction, you were in the room. What's your biggest takeaway from Kellen Moore's introductory press conference?
Yeah, I think a couple of big ones, but just focusing on Kellen Moore and kind of what the future is, it's clear that he's got a very clear vision of what he wants his team to be, which isn't surprising, right? He's got a lot of experience. He's been around a bunch of different places, found success with a lot of different offenses and all these other things. So not super surprising to see that he would have a very clear vision of what it is, but I found in moments he was willing to actually articulate that. He talked about some of the qualities that he liked, and then he wanted to see from his team fast, smart, physical, pretty typical in terms of what you would hear from a first time or from a head coach. But I liked him talk about like using tempo and utilizing motion when they do huddle and all these other things. Those are all quintessential pieces of the modern day era of offensive football in the NFL. He also talks about exploring a bunch of different versions of offense or defense. But I think the biggest thing that we walked away from was sort of this non-committal nature that he approached the future at quarterback. And so I thought those are a couple of the key kind of big takeaways from this one.
So walk me through the process here, Ross. It's a giant question with Derek Carr and what they do, but what is that process like, and what is the timeline in which they got to make a decision?
Yeah, so your timeline is basically before March 14th right now, and you can make a decision at any time before that. But on that March 14th date, that's when the remainder of Derek Carr's base salary becomes guaranteed, effectively guarantees his entire salary base salary for this year, kind of locking him in on this big $51 million cap hit. So if you want to keep Derek Carr around, you're okay with that because then you can restructure that ahead of time and push some of that money down the road and all those other things. But if you're not going to be moving forward with Derek Carr, you definitely don't want all of that money to become guaranteed for this season. So if the Saints are going to make any kind of decision, they'll need to make it within the next month effectively in order to make sure that they avoid that. So they can designate him as a post-June 1 cut so they can save that money come June 2nd. Won't help them in terms of salary cap compliance at the beginning of the new league year, March 12th. But it helps them later on down the road. They can make some other moves to get compliant with the salary cap. Outside of that, they could also pursue a trade where the money just follows him wherever he goes, but he's got a no-trade clause, so they need to make sure that they send him to a situation that he would want to be a part of.
And who's going to trade for the player and the contract? It's hard to imagine. Do you agree? I mean, it's hard to imagine finding a suitor there.
I agree to an extent, but I also know how desperate NFL teams are about the quarterback position. And I think, I think we see it all the time with drafting guys in the first round that have no business being drafted in the first round. We see things like people handing Aaron Rodgers hundreds of millions of dollars to go out there and not do anything for all of 2024. I mean, like we see this kind of stuff. And so, I've made the claim before, and I'll make it again. The New York Jets, for instance, who pursued Derek Carr at the same time that the Saints pursued Derek Carr, would have been better off last year with Derek Carr than they were with Aaron Rodgers. And so if that's a team that now is in a better place, playmaker-wise, offensive weapon-wise, defensive-wise, all those other pieces, than they were back in 2023 when they were pursuing Derek Carr, if that's a team that's interested in Carr now that they've parted ways with Aaron Rodgers, it's not like they're going to bring Sam Darnold back to town. And so all of a sudden that's a team that becomes of interest, and I'm sure would be of interest to Derek Carr as they showed desire in him when he was in that free agency market a couple of years ago. You got
the new Jets GM's phone number. I'll call him if you want. You want to call him?
We can see. Yeah, we'll call him together. Throw him on three-way here.
I'll make that.
Throw it back to the 90s.
We'll get that ball rolling a little bit right now. Get that thing moving. He's on Twitter at Ross.
Just get Woody Johnson on the phone. Just go straight to the owner.
Why not? He's on Twitter at Ross Jackson Nola, the Locked On Saints podcast. doing a great job covering the Saints for us at LouisianaSports.net. We also heard Kellen Moore talk staff today, which is significant. And Ross, it's just been like a fire hose of news. Guys coming back to the Saints staff, leaving the Saints staff, names of interest who could be joining the Saints staff. Maybe hit the high points here. Someone's driving home right now. Like, what do they need to know?
Yeah, I think the one of the big names that has been retained is Keith Williams, the wide receivers coach. That's a great move by Kellen Moore and the New Orleans Saints. That's one that kind of shows a little bit of that player forward thinking. The players love Keith Williams. You keep Keith Williams around as a new head coach. You get some brownie points with your players. I think that's a wise move. Also, Keith Williams, really good at his job, so you definitely want to keep him around. Anyway, the big positions that you're looking for this team to still fill: offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, arguably defensive coordinator being the more important of the two, because Kellen Moore, as he confirmed today, is going to call his own offense. So when it comes to defensive coordinator, the two names that we know so far are either connected or are at least in the running. Durante Jones, a familiar name here in Louisiana, who, of course, was the defensive coordinator for the LSU Tigers back in 2021. That defense got a little bit stronger once Edo kind of turned things over to Durante Jones later on in the season. Yep. He's been with the Minnesota Vikings since then, coaching the defensive backs as well as the defensive passing game coordinator over there. And he coaches, has coached at least a 3-4 system. So something to keep in mind there. Brandon Staley is the other name, former Los Angeles Chargers head coach that hired Kellen Moore as his offensive coordinator. Kellen Moore now has the opportunity to return the favor, also coaches a 3-4 scheme. So we'll see what that means for the Saints who, I talked about the kind of modernity of the references that Kellen Moore was making about his offense. You could see that happen with the New Orleans Saints defense as well, which was criticized for being a little antiquated last season, especially with dealing with mobile quarterbacks, that 3-4 system with the stand-up edge rushers, speed, all these other things that kind of could help them there. So those are two names to watch out for. There will be more in that search. And then offensive coordinator is the other one that's going to be more about installing the offense, communicating the offense, being Kellen Moore's extra hands and eyes when he's got to be doing head coach stuff, elsewhere. And so something to keep in mind with those coordinator hires, it is going to be a full process. It's not a situation where you just hire the guy that you want. You are required to satisfy the Rooney Rule, just like with head coach, just like with general manager. So expect the search, expect multiple interviews, all those other things.
A couple more things for you. The Saints also issued a release. Clyde Edwards-Helaire has been re-signed on a 1-year deal. How, why, all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, what a cool story, right? I mean, this is a guy that's been through a lot. And when he arrived here in New Orleans at the end of last season, he spoke exclusively with LouisianaSports.net, me, after the game. After the game where he kind of got his debut, right? He had 2 games that he was able to participate in at the end of the season. And he talked about how it was a dream come true, that he got the opportunity to play in the Caesars Superdome with his name strewn across the Saints uniform, and how cool that was. Now he gets the opportunity of being brought back on a 1-year deal, which doesn't guarantee anything, but definitely gives him the opportunity to take that dream and extend it for another year potentially. And his versatility, his ability as a receiver out of the backfield, his willingness to be a pass blocker, which I think is maybe one of the most underrated things about him, especially at 5'7". People don't talk enough about his willingness to do that and effectiveness in it. I think he's got a shot, and we'll see how much the Saints continue to invest in that position. Obviously, it's going to be very important looking at Kellen Moore's success with Saquon Barkley in Philly, Ezekiel Elliott in Dallas. He wants those running backs to be a big part of the game. And so if you're able to have a guy like Alvin Kamara, a guy like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and then potentially reinvest in the position in the draft or free agency, I think that puts you in a really good spot. And so overall, fantastic story, awesome story to see the Baton Rouge guy back here in New Orleans, at least through camp, potentially for another year. But you can see sort of the fixins, if you will, of how that could turn into a really good, addition to this roster in 2025.
Last thing for you, what veteran players are you anticipating, or should people start to prepare themselves for not returning to the Saints in 2025? Or do we have a sense of that yet?
Yeah, I think there's a couple players we have a sense of that on. One of the big names right now to watch is going to be Taysom Hill. Every conversation that happens with Taysom Hill nationally is typically bookended or ended rather with the conversation or with the comment about how it's hard to imagine Taysom Hill being back in New Orleans in 2025.
Right.
There's enough of that smoke to wonder or at least ask why when it comes to the potential fire of that conversation. So that's definitely one to watch out for. He had that ACL tear, which may have included additional damage. The surgery went well by all accounts from Darren Rizzi last year, but still on an ACL tear in December on a 9 to 12 month return timeline, what's your real opportunity there with a guy? Even though Kellen Moore did praise Taysom Hill and mention like how great it would be to have him on the field. Will he actually be on the field? So he's one to watch out for. And then, one of the other big names is going to be Cam Jordan to continue to follow. If Cam Jordan's not on the roster, it's going to be because the Saints make that decision. Cam wants to finish his career here. He wants to be back. So I'm sure that the Saints will start that conversation probably with reworking his deal, a potential pay reduction there in terms of his salary going into 2025, which would make sense, understanding his percentage of usage as well as previous production over the course of the past couple of years. But then if those conversations don't yield what the Saints are looking for, then I could see a world in which a parting of ways happens. Ideally, that's not the case. You'd love to see guys start and finish their career with the same team. His father did it in Minnesota. You'd like to see him do it as well, but certainly a name to watch.
Ross Jackson, who, by the way, got a little bit of a hat tip from Kellen Moore at the very beginning of the press conference. Give a listen to this.
Recognize a few of you from the last couple of weeks.
How much FaceTime did you have with Kellen Moore during the Super Bowl, where you just like stared at him for 40 straight minutes?
Yeah, I totaled up all of the video and audio footage. Sometimes I had video and audio, other times I had only audio. But overall, I totaled up 126 minutes.
Okay.
So that's a lot for a 3-day period. It's probably more than I've seen. It's probably more than I've seen my own family that entire week. And so, yeah, that was a nice little shout out from Kellen.
Literally just 2 straight hours, or not straight, but 2 hours of just looking at Ross Jackson over the course of 3 days. Yes.
Worst ways to spend your time for 2 hours.
Yes. Well, it worked now because you're well acquainted with the new head coach of the New Orleans Saints. He's Ross Jackson. Y'all listen to the Locked On Saints podcast and read him over at LouisianaSports.net. Thanks, man.
Thank you, bud. Take care. Stay safe. Talk to you soon.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact. And be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.